Thank you for joining us for the Centre of Excellence Roundtable. So this is, I think, the fifth roundtable in the series. They've been extremely popular because I think as Salesforce becomes more strategic, customers are worrying about how they drive a return on investment. And a Centre of Excellence is clearly one of the ways to do that. So of each of these roundtables, we've assembled a number of experts from both the field and from the consulting world to talk about what it means to be a Centre of Excellence. And one of the questions that keeps coming up is, how do I build a business case? I know I need one, but it's difficult to build a business case. Are there some metrics I should be measuring? And how do I justify to my leadership, to the management team, that we need to put a Centre of Excellence in place? And then the supplementary question is always, if I want to do that, then what are the first things I need to do? How do I get started? So again, great panel today, I said, from both the consulting world and also from customers to talk about that. But before I launch into it and talk to the panel, I'd just like to level set this and talk about what a Centre of Excellence is. So just a couple of minutes on that, and then I'll launch into some of the questions. So the first thing is, what is a Centre of Excellence and why do I need one? So as it says over there, these are a set of skills, not roles. You can see a long list there, 13 different pillars, as we call them, of the Centre of Excellence. And people say, well, but I haven't got 13 people, so how on earth am I going to put this in place? These are a set of skills that you need to have inside your organization. The second thing is it's phased. You don't need to have all 13 of these in place from day one. Clearly, some of them are critical, but as the implementation you have becomes more complex, more strategic, then you need more of these pillars in place. And I think the last thing, which is the most important, is these are solved problems. These are not things that you're going to have to make up from first principles. If you've been around as long as probably I have, I've been around the Salesforce ecosystem 20 years, been around the IT world for probably 35 now. Many of the things we're talking about we've seen for year after year, whether it's through SAP, custom development, and now into SaaS type implementations. So I'm going to run very quickly through each of those principles. So the first one is vision. What are you trying to do with Salesforce and the integrated systems that it's connected to? What are the key metrics? What are you trying to deliver? The second is leadership. Do you have the right team in place? Do you have the sponsorship you need? And of course, associated with that, the budget to be able to deliver on that vision. The next is governance. What is the approach you put in place for driving the change of Salesforce and the change for those integrations? Do you have a change board? And what is the mechanism you're going to use for that change control, which is the next point? So some formalized way of driving changes from ideas through to requirements, through to stories, through to delivered systems. Which leads us on to the next point, which is, what is that methodology? Is it agile? Is it waterfall? Is it a combination of the two? But do you have a consistent way that everybody understands that you're going to be delivering, all the way from idea right through to delivered systems and trained users? The next one is standards. Everyone thinks about standards in terms of coding standards, but we have standards in terms of documentation, in terms of training. So again, having some consistent standards, whether it's one implementation or multiple orgs that you've got, again, critically important. Next one is metadata management. We all hear about uncontrolled agility or all confessions where we have so much metadata we have no understanding about what we've configured. Managing that metadata, managing the way you're configuring so that when you come to make more changes, you understand what changes have already been made, and therefore you're reducing the risk of future changes. This is probably one of the areas where people spend least time and probably need to focus on most. The next is architecture. Again, when we looked at the root cause analysis for all confessions, one of the root causes was thinking about a poor architecture. You need to architect in security. You need to architect in performance. You need to architect in the way that the system's going to perform. And it's very difficult to reverse engineer architecture. Next is security. Again, as I said, from architecture, you need to design security in. It's very difficult to, after the fact, try and stick sticking plasters on top of the system to try and patch up security. So again, a lot of these things thought about upfront, both in terms of performance, security, all of those need to be designed in upfront. Next issue is change management. That's not the change of the system that was covered around change control, but actually how do you help your end users adopt the changes you're making? It's great if you've built great applications, but again, if nobody's adopting it, if end users don't understand it, if we have very few people logging in or using the system as expected, then that return on investment is leaking away. PMO stands for Program Management Office. If we have a large program, how are we tracking the changes? How are we tracking the return on investment from all of those changes we're making? The next bullet point is about tooling. So again, Salesforce comes out of the box with a bunch of tooling, but we all know that there are other applications that you need to sit on top. DevOps, backup, configuration management, plus all the other app exchange tooling, apps that you may install. So again, having an understanding about how you're going to drive that consistency. So again, you're leveraging that across multiple orgs if you've got multiple orgs. And the last one is prototyping. Again, we've heard from a lot of Center of Excellence leaders that if they're big enough, they then have a facility where they are trying out new features, building new applications, which they've pulled from one org and then they can reapply into other orgs. So that's a big laundry list of things that you need to think about. And as I said, that these are, putting these in place are critically important. If we think about the return on investment from this, the 10K Advisors report that came out, where they reviewed about 300 customers, found that those who had a Centre of Excellence in place had a far greater return on investment. So there clearly is a reason for doing that. And I think part of the panel session is to talk about how we build a business case for it, the things that we do to build a business case. As I said, as I started, I said that you don't necessarily need to have every one of these pillars in place from the beginning. So if there's a white dot, then not necessary. Orange dot, yes, we need. It's a good idea to have it. Red dot, absolutely need it. And we've phased it by small, medium, and large. And that's not necessarily the number of end users you have in your org. You may be a small org because you're, say, in the wealth management area or a small investment bank. But because of the strategic nature of Salesforce, because of the compliance associated with it, it's complex, and therefore I would consider it large. But as you can see from the dots there, some things need to be in place from day one. You need the leadership, you need metadata management, architecture, security. Other things you can probably get away with. But as the complexity or the importance of your Salesforce implementation grows, as the number of integrations grows, then you should be working towards having every single one of these pillars filled in. So if you need more information about Centre of Excellence, if you go to elements.cloud/COE, there's a number of white papers there, again, giving some examples and digging into more detail in terms of each of these different pillars. So with that, I'm delighted to introduce the panel. So going left to right in terms of what's on screen. First, Kristen Jensen, who is the Salesforce Director for NTT Data Services. Hi there. So for those of you who have know NTT Data Services as a Salesforce implementation partner, that's really only scratching the surface. NTT Data is 130,000 people, and in the data services there are 50,000 consultants. And Kristen has the unenviable task of actually being the Salesforce Director, which means that she's running Salesforce on behalf of NTT Data. And there is nothing worse than running an implementation where half the people in the organization think they can do a better job because they're consultants. So it'd be fascinating to hear her experiences of running the Centre of Excellence. Matt is due to join us, hasn't got here yet. So I'll move to Dan. Dan Powell. Dan is now at Florida State University, where he's the Director of Community Engagement Technologies. He's been only there a year, so it'll be interesting to contrast that with the previous 7 years he spent at Yale, where he had a similar role, but obviously prefers the sunshine of Florida rather than the winters of Yale. But again, interesting contrast there in terms of 7 years at Yale driving major implementations where Salesforce was at the heart, and now what he's trying to achieve in Florida. And then moving on to Andy Rising. Andy actually has a very similar career path to me. He started as a mechanical engineer as I did, then went to Accenture. although he had focused on CRM systems. Now, time at Sonoma Partners, but now he's at West Monroe, where he's the principal of customer solutions. Again, focusing on Salesforce. I know he's deeply engaged with the implementation around Encino. Again, West Monroe, you may not have heard of them as a consulting partner, but again, a major consulting partner in the Salesforce space. And I noticed that they were Fortune's one of the top 100 best companies to work for. So, and also one of the best companies to work for millennials. So again, a great consulting firm, great supporter in the ecosystem. Let me start with you, Andy. As you see so many customers, can you talk about the sort of the level of COE maturity that you see in customers, and then maybe how you help them build a business case?
Yeah, absolutely. And being in consulting for over a decade in Salesforce and a little longer in other CRM platforms, I've certainly seen the spectrum. In West Monroe, we focus on middle market clients. So even within that middle market, we've seen a range of clients just starting out. Salesforce is kind of the first cloud product they've purchased. Implementing it is the first kind of cloud or SaaS implementation effort they've ever gone down. You mentioned Encino. Encino is a kind of a vertically focused platform for banking and financial services. It often creates a really good reason to purchase Salesforce for the first time at an organization, which is like for a bank, very hierarchical, very structured organization with pillars that have checks and balances built into their business processes. And so we do see a range. I would say, some of the patterns I notice most often is that if it's an immature or a first-time adoption situation, there's often a struggle for resources. There's a need to kind of identify an admin. There's often a job rec that's opened at the start of the project to find an admin. Often goes unfulfilled the entire time we work on a first release, and consultants like us fill in the gaps there. So when your skill set slide was, I think, perfect, because it shows that it really is a multitude of skills, and you don't need one role per skill. So we see clients needing to build a case for investment. And I'd say that first starts with building a business case for the product itself. I would say in my experience, only about 10% of the clients we work with actually have or develop a business case for the Salesforce product. And by that, I mean, what is the expected return on investment for, whether it's our deal pipeline or our service processes. And sometimes that, that correlates with, it's an obvious business case. They're moving from paper-based processes or something very legacy, so they don't need to go through that sort of analysis. But oftentimes we definitely see that there's more success to be had when you start out with that alignment. When we see the CEO or other senior leadership all agreeing to form a steering committee, agree to the objectives that the platform is intending to deliver. And the best way I've seen this done is actually done on kind of a product by product basis. So maybe you consider your sales and opportunity pipeline, your first product you launch in Salesforce. Maybe your customer service is another product. Those would each have different objectives that could provide different value, and measure it throughout. So that's the first step. If you can align at that level, I think aligning at the beginning helps streamline the entire case and investment going forward. But then there's also the COE business case itself. What is the return on investment for actually investing in your internal COE? And so we see a lot more, I think, interesting things out of that. And one thing we try to do as a consulting partner is help an organization build out that COE as we go. And it's kind of like, putting the wings on the airplane while trying to take off on the runway. But we can do it in small, little increments. And I would say the ways that you can measure ROI and begin to build that business case is really kind of aligning it along the skill sets that you had listed, Ian. And there's certain activities that can either avoid cost down the road or provide immediate value when they're executed. And another thing I think of often is shift left, which I know Elements basically embodies shift left concepts and platform. But so if you can do these things earlier in your implementation lifecycle, that's more opportunity to save cost or increase value. So for example, I would say business analysis is a huge value add. If you can get any single internal resource, whether they're a business person who's delivering on the line, pull them in to do some business analysis, help them ensure that the team builds the right thing, or help them test it and ensure that it was delivered according to expectations. All of those will be ways that you can increase value. You can measure those. We often do it with just measuring the throughput of what we've been able to put into the system. By that, like just measuring your feedback, taking in how many things were requested, how many things did we deliver for the release, just kind of your delivery metrics, but then also designing your product and your COE around a dashboard of sorts. And just think, when you first set it out, what are the major things that this team will be delivering? And then build a dashboard for that, design that dashboard at the beginning, figure out how you can build that into your records as you use the system for your business process. And then your value reporting is taken care of. One of my favorite examples actually comes from my lovely wife, who is a Salesforce user at her company. And she was put in a position where they kind of implemented a Salesforce package, and she was able to kind of join in right at the start. And so what they did right from the beginning was they just tracked the amount of dollars that are coming in and going out, and kind of throughout this business process. And each of the different steps has, aspects that bring in cost and maybe bring in revenue. And they just built this in so that as soon as they went live with the product, they had a dashboard that immediately showed, here's how much cost we saved this week, this month. Her senior VP was over the moon. And now, go figure, a month later, they're already being asked if they can cut headcount. Now they have some real metrics to look at.
That's fantastic. And also, I love that, bringing that to life in terms of how you can actually build a dashboard and actually track things over time. So I think, Kristen, I think I saw your eyes rolling when Andy said some companies don't even have a business case or have any budget for it. Surely life's slightly different at NTT. Can you talk about sort of what it was like when you joined and where you've got to now in terms of managing the NTT implementation?
Sure. I think for us, it was an instance of a little big bang, because our COE was created as a result of a really large acquisition. So NTT Data bought Dell Services. And so we had to figure out rather quickly what we were going to do for this really combined organization that became NTT Data Services together. And so we really quickly figured out that to have a successful implementation of Salesforce, it was going to require all of those things that you detailed, all of those skills. And so we definitely identified we needed the COE to be stood up immediately, and it needed most of those things immediately, including the change control and the governance right away. Right, we needed that. All of the documentation immediately, so that we had everything to look back on from day one, because we stood up a brand new instance of Salesforce as a combined organization. We didn't go with the NTT version. We didn't go with the data from Dell Services. We stood up a brand new one and then migrated all of our data together. I think the important thing for us was two things, and it continues to be the thing that's important for us today, and that is ownership and visibility. And so having our business feel the ownership of the process and the tool has been vital. And so when we stood up the COE, having reached out to each individual vertical and each individual horizontal to find a representative for our change advisory board, to ask, can you and will you join this board? And then explaining to them what that was going to mean was important, and understanding for them that that was going to mean, that they have some ownership and some understanding of how Salesforce works at a little technical level, was important for them. And it continues to be today. And I think we have, again, real ownership for them. They continue, most of the people that joined our change advisory board 4 years ago are still on that change advisory board. And in other organizations I've been a part of, that change advisory board has started at a very high level and then somehow got pushed down to lower level employees, and it somehow got tactical. And I feel like our change advisory board has remained very strategic with the leaders that we have on our board, which has been great. And I think that's very important. And the other thing that I mentioned was visibility. And so I think those two things, ownership and visibility for a COE, is super important. Having visibility of all of your backlog, all of your changes, whether that's communicating to your users, communicating to your leaders, having all of your backlog visible to everyone, and what's coming and what you've done. All of those things are combined going to make you successful in the long run.
So there's an interesting parallel here, or that I think both Andy talks about as well, which is, and something I guess I'm about to get on my hobby horse about, which is I think Salesforce admin actually is the wrong term. I think admin was true 20 years ago when we first started using Salesforce. You added users, you had very minor changes you made. But I think now the admin is more of a product owner, and you have to have a product ownership mindset, which
Sure.
you talked about backlog, you talked about a vision, a roadmap. They're things that product owners talk about. We obviously build a product. We have a product management team. They don't consider themselves Elements admins. They consider themselves the Elements product management team. So I think there's a different sort of conversation that I think we ought to start having at an admin level. But I don't want to take us off course too much. We've talked about sort of where you start with a COE and whether you inherit one or whether you put one in place. Dan, you obviously came from Yale where you had a number of years running it, but now you've come into Florida. Do you want to contrast the two and help us understand like the level of maturity and how a COE has played in both those two organizations?
Sure. So first, so a couple things. But first, I want to reinforce what you just talked about around product ownership over admin. That's how I have my team structured. It is, it's. I feel like that's the way we've pivoted. That's the way we've gone, and that's really important. And when you think about a center of excellence, and you think about the 13 pillars that you talked about, the enabling component across all 13 is your people. Whether that's at the executive leadership level and the support that you need to have there, versus the team that needs to actually make the COE happen, between architectural reviews and QA and release management across the board, the standards and methodologies that you talked about. My role at Yale, I had a team that delivered on the Salesforce side. We actually didn't have a center of excellence there. We had the makings of it, but it fell apart for a number of reasons. But it all starts with shared vision about what the center of excellence is, shared commitment across executive leadership, the commitment that you have to the Salesforce platform as a whole, and what you're trying to accomplish from a CRM and engagement, and what the strategic vision is. And a lot of that was forming and is still forming for them. And there's some strong leaders there that I know are bringing it together. Florida State was a really interesting shift for me. Yes, the warm sun is certainly a part of it. But what the university's leadership here wanted to do and wanted to get done was really inspiring. And so that was really appealing for me to want to come here, and what they're trying to do for and what their commitment is to the student experience and student success, everything they do around the students, shared across all of the stakeholders across the university. So, right away, when you look at, well, what assets do you have in place, when you arrive somewhere that's starting off with a new Salesforce implementation or wants a Salesforce implementation. And, we had the right alignment here at Florida State across our executive leaders. And that was a big draw for me, and a key reason for coming to Florida State. Now, CRM and engagement is it's not a new concept at Florida State. They've had a CRM and the idea and around CRM for 20 years, but to really advance it and really make it a step forward and a commitment and a step forward, that's where they were. And so that's where I came in. I've now been here a little over a year and a half. We have 2 major enterprise rollouts. And then we have a lot of other smaller applications across all of our different colleges and departments, both done and still coming. And so the overwhelming amount of demand that we saw and are experiencing right now at Florida State, for my one delivery team to handle all of that, it's like, well, sure, yes, we can, but it's a win. Like when can we get to that? Because we can only handle as much as we can handle for so long. And there's other factors too that are in play. It's like, from a strategy standpoint, why a center of excellence? It's like, well, gosh, we've got a ton of reasons for a center of excellence, right? It's like, what are your strengths and weaknesses that you have? What is the strategic opportunities that you're trying to accomplish for the university? And how can you scale your investment in Salesforce in the CRM and engagement space? How can you deliver faster? And so you need to be able to distribute that skill set around. How do you grow a talent pool that is, willing and able and wanting to be a part of Florida State University? We have a hidden gem of a city with Tallahassee, but a lot of people don't know it. We're still an hour from the beach. So, it's like, but we've got really good talent resident in Tallahassee, but they haven't necessarily been exposed to Salesforce. So, when I'm looking at a hiring strategies, like I want to be able to, one, grow Salesforce skill sets around the university, because that helps me in terms of my own hiring of talent. It also allows me to, teach and get students involved. And we have an intern program, and it's like, all these things, allow for a center of excellence to happen and take place. So, it's like when you look at the what do you need to get started? For me, we've got the senior leadership. We've got a shared vision. We're still working on some of that vision. It's not concrete. What do we mean by a center of excellence? What are we trying to accomplish for the university? But we also have a talent base started, a talent pool. We've got the skill sets. When I came in, we had there was no Salesforce certifications. Nobody really knew it. Now my team has 8 certifications, and we're growing. It's like, but we have to put into place those things in order to make this successful, and we're right at those very beginning steps.
So, if I think about what the sort of the way you've approached, all three of you have approached it, it almost feels like having a center of excellence is not something which is like, there's a business case, we have to build a center of excellence. The center of excellence is just a description of the things that you need to run a Salesforce well. Is that a fair summary? Because if someone says, I need to go and buy a center of excellence, that sounds like there's another big lift, big investment. It almost feels like people are coming at it from the other way by going, these are the skills we need. It happens to be called a center of excellence.
Absolutely. And I was so glad that the term product owner came up, because, aside from the trend towards, I think, product mindset in organizations, not even having to do with Salesforce, but just is the organization, we see them moving that way. But really, yeah, I consider the COE, the Salesforce product team, that internal team. And in my opinion, the business case to be built is really about, I think of it as a few different levels of maturity you can get to. The very first level, I would though say, is it do it at all, do the skills at all. And, given the resources you have, maybe you're outsourcing some of those skills, like maybe you're going to a consulting firm for those. So you can create incremental value just by teaching or training, your own resources to do that. And I actually think there's such a ability to teach, especially now with Salesforce, with Trailhead and things that they've been evolving. And Trailhead is also going far beyond just the technical Salesforce skills now. There's now a business analysis course on Trailhead. So, I think that really helps an organization or a sponsor pretty much provide, say the resources and cost is already accounted for, and all we're going to try to do with our COE is build incremental value. So absolutely, I think the term has taken hold, and it was a term that predated Salesforce, but really, in my opinion, it's all about just creating a team that can over time update the product more efficiently and provide better business value via customer outcomes. I think the product mindset brings that that focus on customer outcomes. Those can be internal customers, external customers. But if your COE is, executing with that as a focus, you're going to provide value.
I think for me, the COE encompasses the industry standard of all the people, processes, and the tools around Salesforce, right? Because it has to be the intake mechanism for all of our enhancements, projects, as well as all the governance, the DevOps, all of the things that encompass Salesforce and all the integrations we have with it. So it's all of the processes and the tools, but then the team that supports it, and not just my team that reports to me that technically supports Salesforce, but the business that supports it, that provides us with the requirements and, ultimately the chain of, leadership that also sponsors it, approves it, provides us with funding. All of those people are part of our COE and the ecosystem that is Salesforce. So it's a little, people, processes, and tools, but really it is all of those things are the COE for me.
So that suggests that the COE, rather than saying we are putting in place a COE, what we're actually, coming back to my slide again, is these are the skills we need, and actually trying to check them off. And therefore you can measure COE maturity based on how good are the skills, how well implemented are those approaches in and call it whatever you want, call it whether it's your product board, whether it's your Salesforce implementations, or even if it has its, and if the implementation has its own name, it's sort of called PACE, or it's called My Florida, or whatever it is, the project now has to build those skills. Sorry, Dan, I thought you were about to say something.
Oh, well, so yes, and what Kristen was talking about in terms of budget, in our university setting, and I'm sure it's true in many places, is that our constituents have discretionary budgets. They get to make the decisions on which technologies they want to buy and support. And at the same time, we need to honor that. We also need to look at, okay, well, our university is really interested in understanding the 360 experience for the student. We recognize the student, is interested in many areas of the university, and many areas of the university are interested in that student. And so how do we, maximize what that experience is? And so, one thing that a Center of Excellence does is and because they have, our constituents have these discretionary funds, we want to encourage them to adopt these central technologies so that, we can also meet the strategic needs of the university, as well as allowing them to meet the strategic needs of their college and department. Salesforce allows us to do that, but a Center of Excellence is almost a necessity so that you can allow them to have control over their product that they want to put out there. If we're going to live, especially because we want to, we have an interest in what that data is and what those experiences are.
So let me take things in a slightly different direction. I think it's driven off a couple of the comments we made. There's a war for talent out there. It seems like there are more open recs, and people are now rethinking their careers based on the last year and a half. So a couple of things. One is that surely if you're working for an organization that has a Center of Excellence in place, it must be a less stressful place to work. So I think then there's an interesting angle here about actually, if you've got some of these things in place, it actually makes it easier to acquire talent. So I'd like to sort of pick up that point for a moment. And then the second thing is, does it have to be, can we work remotely? Does Dan have an unfair advantage because he's got a whole pool of students that he can start to draw on? So first one is about, let's talk about, is it easy to recruit, and how a Center of Excellence helps that? But then the second one is, where do we go for that talent? Is it internal or do we go external?
Okay, I'll jump in. Or Andy, if you were going to.
Well, I was going to say, I don't hire folks except to be consultants. I'd rather the true owners go first.
All right, I'll jump in. I think that when you look at a university, the folks that work at universities are typically very mission aligned, very You know, it's like they're not, you know, maybe. Well, I mean, their drive is to support the mission of the university. You know, it's like, you know, we've got obvious weaknesses. We give amazing benefits, awesome benefits. It's a great place to work. It's a great environment. But salary isn't one of those that are up high on the list. You know, so you know, it's like to attract somebody and into, you know, Tallahassee is a smaller metro area. It is the state capital, so we have a decent size, you know, labor pool, but we're not, you know, like New York City metro, where you have a much broader stance. So for me, I need to look at ways to pull from within, and build from within.
So I'll answer for my perspective. NTT Data Services, you know, is a different organization, I guess, from yours, Dan, in that we are also a consulting partner for Salesforce. So we have talent internally that work for Salesforce, you know, work on Salesforce in consulting capacity, which makes my life maybe slightly easier in some capacity, because if there are times when I need a resource, I have tapped into resources in our Salesforce practice and said, I need to borrow somebody. So that's been rather nice from my perspective to be able to borrow. The other thing that has made life easy for, you know, both of our organizations, myself internal and our Salesforce practice, has been, I actually started a program with them to help train their junior folks. So some of their junior developers, for example, needed some hands-on experience, particularly when Lightning was still sort of new. And customers really needed developers with hands-on experience in Lightning. And because we had already gone to 100% Lightning, I said, listen, if you'll let me use them for 6 months, you know, they can work in our instance, I'll train them, and it'll be win-win. By the time they're done in my instance, you can go deploy them out to clients. So it's really been a nice partnership with our consulting practice to be able to utilize them, and they've gotten to utilize us. So that's been great. But to your question, Ian, about, you know, recruiting and whether or not there is a idea that it's easier if you have a COE. I don't know that I have heard that. I can say that as a result of having a COE, we definitely have less technical debt, for sure. 100%, I can say that. And our technical debt, from our perspective over the last 4 years of being, you know, having our Salesforce live, is fantastic. Our technical debt looks great. But I think it is all due to the fact that we do have the COE in place. And because every member of that COE is fully respectful that they come to every conversation about enhancements to the tool with that in mind, and don't you know, request things just on behalf of one vertical or one horizontal, right? They're really thinking about the system as a whole, and is it good for everyone, and should we put this in place, right? They're constantly asking that question. I know we can put this in place, but should we, right? That's really a question that I challenge them to ask of every enhancement project requirement. And so I think that's the real benefit of joining a company that has a COE, is you're going to have a really, hopefully, clean environment, because there is really some governance around it, and some standards. So hopefully that answers your question.
And I'll add, I think all those things do at least contribute to less stress, which was part of your question, Ian. And I was thinking about that, you know, and great question. And in terms of this market climate, although I think as long as I've been in Salesforce, it's been hard to hire an outside resource that knows Salesforce, you know. And you know, I think of a couple examples from clients. So one type of client we worked with, they implemented Salesforce, but they already had a very established technology organization. And one of the foundational principles that that leader instilled in the organization was redundancy. And so that was skills redundancy. So when it came time to do the Salesforce implementation, they took that approach. And it was definitely, it seemed like kind of a slower approach than I was used to. But what they described to me was we have to go slow at first to go fast later. And one of the things they did, in fact, was they convinced us that they always liked the idea of making one story, like user story per field in the system. And I was like, that's so many stories, that's crazy. How can we manage this? But it actually, they proved me wrong. And it was very relaxed. It was very easy to account for security on each and every field. Where do we want this to go? Is it contributing to another aspect of the system? So they, that organization really taught me a lot in terms of, your maturity and how you can align your team. And really the fact that everyone was redundant made it such a low stress environment for all those people. And then I'll also add that, when an organization, tries to take the tack of, well, we're gonna, we bought Salesforce, we're gonna open a job rec for an admin, we really need this admin, we need that skill set in-house, we want to hire an expert, even though I don't know anyone who was born a Salesforce expert, we all learned it somewhere, right? But if they do open that job rec, and let's say they get that person hired, I would anticipate that that person is probably coming into a position where they're going to need to be a hero, and they're going to need to do a lot of those skill sets on your slide. They're going to need to be lifting a lot of weight in various ways. And I think that can be very, very stressful, but also it cannot be fulfilling. I think with a COE, if you can have more delegated skill sets, opportunities to kind of declare that you're going to build a certain skill set that you don't have today and kind of focus on that as a career development point, I think that provides a much more fulfilling employee experience rather than, and by the way, usually if I have seen an organization find that magical admin, they usually end up going to a subcontractor firm. So they're not necessarily even getting the benefits of the organization. They're not necessarily a true employee. And so they're not even part of the culture necessarily. So I absolutely wholeheartedly would say, let's grow within.
You picked up an interesting point there, though, about redundancy versus and the fact that now there's a lot more job mobility. So somebody can go, actually, I don't need to work in Tallahassee, but I'm sure I could work for Dan because it sounds like a great place to work. So I don't have to live in Tallahassee. I could be sitting here in San Francisco. So suddenly the ability for people to move from job to job means that any of the knowledge walks with them. So suddenly we're going back to the value of the COE. Kristen talked about low levels of technical debt, high levels of documentation means that you're not dependent on one or two people. So let's pick that up for a moment. Can we now work remotely? Do you think you can end up with remote teams, particularly around the COE, or do you think because of the nature of it's about shared ownership, you actually need to have people in one or two locations?
I mean, I'll answer that. I think we absolutely can work remotely. I think, this past year and a half has proven that, if anything. I used to have a fairly centralized team, and we really don't any longer, and that's okay. But we pivoted, in the time of coronavirus. And what that means is that we had to culturally just shift gears and, make sure that we get together as a team. I have team members in India, Canada, the US, and as I mentioned, sometimes I utilize folks from our practice, which they're located in various places. But we get together on video and we make sure we are on video so that everyone's included. We're very inclusive. And we get together just to do fun things, right? Not necessarily work things, but just fun things for 30 minutes every week, just to bring the team together and make sure nobody feels isolated. Because it can be very isolating if you're the only person at a location and not getting lunch with your co-workers, things like that. So it's very important, I believe, in my opinion at least, that when you do have a remote team, that you make sure, that we're connecting in that way. That's how we've chosen to do it. And it's been very, very successful this past year and a half. But I think it's proven we absolutely can do that. It makes, deployments have been perfectly smooth and successful. It was one of my concerns, was how we were going to do that with a spread out team, because we used to do that in person together. And it's actually worked out just fine. We can do that.
So you don't see going back to the old world? Do you think we've now, just like 9/11, where, again, I remember before 9/11, I was used to be able to go in the cockpit and sit with a pilot, and that's all over now. Do you think I found it interesting, when it was March the 13th, when I sent everyone home and said, right, but we're all working from home. By the way, when you come back, life won't be different. And I told the story about sitting in an aircraft, and a whole bunch of our team went, what do you mean you could go in the cockpit of an aircraft? So again, they've never been in an aircraft, but there were some significant changes happened before and after 9/11. Do you think the same has happened around with COVID, that now we're not going to go back to the teams we had and we've made remote work work? And Kristen, you said you've made it the change. Do you think you'll ever go back to the way we used to work?
I don't think we will, at least. I don't think there's a need to really any longer. I don't know that I have to hire here in our corporate location. I think I have the ability now to hire really from anywhere, and I've proven it can work.
So Dan, the appeal of Florida is not necessarily the appeal of Florida, but again, there's maybe an opportunity. You said about wage arbitrage. Maybe Florida State, the universities don't pay the highest salaries, but if you can live somewhere which is cheap where you want to live, then maybe there are advantages there.
So those decisions are HR decisions, way above me. But I think there's a couple things, right? So there's, one thing that we absolutely proved during this pandemic is that we are 110% productive working remote. It's like there's no commute times, my folks are working. There's no walking between meetings, we're working. And so the amount of time that we're delivering and what we've been able to deliver and do, is off the charts. I mean, we did 2 different enterprise rollouts for the university during this time, and we formed as a team during this time. So that's the one thing we've absolutely proven for sure. From a university perspective, I guess there's a couple questions that I would still ask, right? It's, innovation, where does that happen? Where does that happen historically? It's like, well, some of that's water cooler conversation that leads from one thing into another thing. You remove those things. You remove that, walk by somebody's office or desk and say, hey, how's it going? And you get into these different kind of conversations that might happen. So there's definitely a trade-off. Can you still have that in this remote environment? Yes and no. And I think, what Kristen said, you have to be deliberate about some of those water cooler conversations and making sure that they happen. From a center of excellence standpoint, on the delivery side, can we do a remote? 100%? Absolutely. From a, it's like there's, so I think it's around those other things. From a university perspective, if you look at, you think about your own experience and your tie and your loyalty towards your university, where was that built? And it, historically has always been built on your physical campus. So you come here, you embrace the university, you walk the quad, you're involved, you go to the games, you build your school colors, you wear them, and that sticks with you. And so now we're in a different world where we have to look at it and it's like, well, hey, the world's changing. How do we also build brand loyalty in this digital environment? I think that's a different conversation than the Center of Excellence, but it's certainly a very interesting and unique situation that all universities are currently facing.
So Andy, you're working with multiple customers. I assume you're remote, but are you helping them build remote Center of Excellence teams, or how's that working?
Yeah, I think everything that everyone else said is applicable to our industry as well. We are being selective about meeting in person, and when we do it, it's really about building relationships, building trust, or testing and getting some really good testing done, user acceptance testing always. So, I think what's nice about it is I think it's helping us bifurcate the human element of the work we do versus the kind of process and technology element. And I also frame absolutely everything as people, process, technology. And what I really am enjoying about and finding kind of the silver lining of what's happened is, and this is all stuff that the author Cal Newport does a great job in his writing talking about. But basically, it's, I think, giving us an opportunity to step back and look at the work we're doing and, do process analysis and govern it a little bit, give the things we do names and steps, and then decide, how we can do it a little bit better or how we can just make it more of a repeatable process. And all of that is going to transform into, a better working life for our employees. And so I see this kind of evolving and happening. Definitely Salesforce and COEs are a place where it can be just part of what you do. But like I said earlier, I do see organizations also adopting these types of concepts under the guise of, enterprise agile or product management focus. So I'm really excited about where things are going. I actually think it's just the beginning. And then once we map everything into processes, we'll have AI doing the work for us.
So let me go back a moment though. At the very beginning, top of the conversation, we talked about the importance of getting a shared vision, leadership together. Can we do that remotely, or is that like we'll get everyone off site? I mean, I remember my days of Accenture. The way to get a partner engaged and make sure you had their full attention was to actually take them to a nice restaurant and put a meal in front of them, so they had nothing else to distract them. So, do we need to do something which is we do an offsite to get that central leadership, that vision defined, and then we can start to build out from there? Or do you think we can even do that visionary piece remotely?
It is doable. I think a well-executed remote workshop can get close. We really love using virtual whiteboard tools so that everyone has a visual center, because then you can check your phone in a little bit and you can still follow along to what's happening. But there is no substitute for that, especially in I think the ability to create a human trust. People will just be more prone to say things that maybe they feel a little uncomfortable saying if it's within a room that maybe, there's not a recording going on and they're not sending that message through a digital medium.
How do you build that vision? How do you get that leadership team? Can you do that remotely, or would it be better to get them in a room? Can you get more stuff done more quickly, particularly in the very early stages of setting that vision?
It's helpful to have the in-person conversations, for sure, and bringing people together. I think that the technologies that are available to us allow us to have more conversations where multiple people are talking at the same time, or allowing for different sidebars and breakouts. But I think that it doesn't really replace where we're at in terms of building those relationships together and that shared vision. I think that it absolutely can be done. I guess we'll see how time unfolds for us.
Yeah, and I think it varies based on the level of maturity you've already got. Clearly, the three of you have all been in organisations where you've already been through the level of getting leadership in place. In fact, the level of maturity that you're talking about I think is unusual in the Salesforce ecosystem. Admittedly, there are 300,000 customers out there, but I think, and Andy, you've probably seen more. You've seen a lot of customers as I have, where something like All Confessions or Why Admins Drink show that actually life in the trenches without a COE is pretty awful. And the conversation about being a product owner is a level above the concept of I'm an admin. These are the changes I want you to make. I think, Kristen, you talked about not just can I do it, but should I do it? And not should I do it for one business unit, but should I do it for the good of actually both horizontal and the vertical groups? So there's a level of maturity I think that all of you have got to in terms of the conversation you're having, which I think from the people listening to the session, that's a level to aspire to, rather than can I deliver more changes more quickly, which seems to be the DevOps mantra. I think, Andy, at the beginning you said about shift left. should I be doing those things? Actually, let's make sure they're the right things to be delivering. I'm conscious we're nearly at the top of the hour. It's been a fantastic discussion, but just from each of you, sort of one nugget, sort of what if you could only do one thing around a centre of excellence, what would that be?
Yeah, okay, I'll go real quick. So I think that the one thing we just started to talk about is on, how do you make sure you're doing the right thing and having the leadership in place, because you'll have your own delivery team delivering projects, and you've got to work those projects through your, architectural review, quality assurance, and release management. Then you'll have other projects coming in from, other departments and colleges, in my case, or maybe the areas for your company. And what's the most important thing for you to review architecturally, QC, and make sure it goes to release management, and having that prioritization piece in place that goes along with your governance to help you deliver from your standpoint, leading the COE.
I'll go. So from my perspective, I think the most important thing is to just start, right? If you get an analysis paralysis, you're going to go nowhere. And I think just take that first step and start something, because whether you're in IT or whether you're part of the business and you're responsible for standing up a COE, or nobody even knows it's needed except you, and you just think it's needed, take the step, try standing it up, because it's worth it. And I would do it as soon as possible and as quickly as you can. It will help your implementation no matter what, and it will increase visibility to you personally. It will increase visibility to your implementation. It will help, decrease your technical debt. It will help you map out your processes. It will help you in all sorts of ways you didn't even realize, but you got to take the first step, right? You just have to do it. And your business will look to you for leadership and expertise on how should we do it? What is the methodology we need to use? And so, start somewhere, but don't just get stuck. That's my advice.
Yeah, here to that. I would say the same exact thing. And to build on that, the roles that I've seen, and I see a lot of job titles at different organizations, and over time I've seen how they can all coagulate to form an implementation team or a COE. And so I would say a pro tip that I've seen is, when you're trying to just do it, it doesn't matter what methodology you pick or which way you start out, because you just need to do it the first time and then iterate from there. And I think the most success can be had by not posting for that admin job rec or trying to get a technical resource. You can hire them, they do charge for that, but I think the most value you can find is by finding folks who can be business analysts. And these are folks who aren't afraid to get into the details. And if you can find those folks, and they're magical people, and if they exist doing a business role today, and you can pull them even a little bit often to help the Salesforce project, they can do business process mapping. They can contribute requirements that are good, right, fulfilling, holistic written requirements that actually are going to be relevant for their business because they know the business, they're doing it. They can help you test. And so, a business analyst type role can deliver value across the entire life cycle of the program. Wherever you are right now, if you can get a business analyst to jump into some details, I think that's going to be a recipe for success. And they absolutely can start with zero Salesforce experience and begin adding value.
That's fantastic. By the way, a quick note here, there is a Salesforce Business Analyst certification that is in development, and it'll be out next year, because I worked on scoping it. So again, Salesforce has understood the importance of this and is doubling down on it, which is great. So, we could have this conversation for the rest of the day, but you've all got busy lives that you need to get on with. So thank you so much for for joining us. And for those of you who've been listening, there will be a recording which we sent out to everyone, so you can then go back over some of the gems that we've had over the course of the last hour. So thank you so much for joining us. Kristen, Dan, Andy, thank you so much. Bye-bye.